Good evening. A privilege to welcome you to the Civil War and the Forging of Character series. We're delighted you're here for the third lecture in this series, made possible by the Ann and Jack Glenn Character Education Fund here at Lovett and by brothers Austin, Bob, Jack, and Lewis. Two of those brothers are here with us this evening. Austin, Glenn, and Bob. Glenn, at least stand up and accept our thanks here, Austin. We so appreciate the Glenn families making possible this wonderful series as well as their ongoing commitment to Lovett. We're also grateful for our strong partnership with the Atlanta History Center. The History Center's senior military historian Gordon Jones and CEO Sheffield Hale and their colleagues have been so important to the success of this series. I know Sheffield Hale and Gordon Jones are here. Will two of you please stand up and accept our thanks? They've been wonderful partners. So grateful to them. Our Director of Community Relations, Sandy Rodella, Strategic Communications Director, Kim Blass, working with their counterparts at the History Center, have done wonderful things around the marketing and outreach for this program. And we have a terrific speaker series committee, Bob Glenn, Amanda Glenn Brady, Hampton Mars, Andy Spencer, Kim Blass, and Dr. Gordon Jones. So we thank them as well. I'm fortunate this evening to have the opportunity to introduce one of Lovett's own, Dr. George W. McDaniel, who graduated in Lovett's first graduating class, 1962. Dr. McDaniel has served for the last 24 years as Executive Director of Drayton Hall, a historical site of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in Charleston, South Carolina. We are so pleased that a number of Atlanta friends of Drayton Hall are in the audience this evening. They had a wonderful program last night, I'm told. Before assuming his current position in 1989, Dr. McDaniel served for 4 years as Director of Museums and Education at the Atlanta Historical Society, now the Atlanta History Center, and before that for 5 years as Director of Research and Special Projects at the Center for Southern Folklore in Memphis. He has a distinguished educational pedigree with a BA in history from the University of the South at Sewanee, and we're also grateful. We've got a number of Sewanee alumni here in the audience this evening. He earned his MAT in history from Brown and a PhD in history from Duke. His primary fields of research at Duke and those interests continue to be strong ones for him to this day, were American history and African American history. After graduating from Sewanee, and before beginning his graduate studies, Dr. McDaniel taught here at Lovett, then served for a year in the Peace Corps in Togo, West Africa, before being in the front lines as an Army infantryman in Vietnam, 1969 to 1970. We shall hear this evening, a little later this evening, about some of his experiences in Vietnam and how formative they were to him. George has numerous articles and book reviews to his credit in many publications, including the South Carolina Encyclopedia, the Journal of American Folklore, the Journal of American History, the Washington Post, and the North Carolina Historical Review. He has served as a consultant for projects funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the American Association of Museums. He led efforts in partnership with the History Channel to produce The Voices of Drayton Hall, an interactive landscape tour on DVD. This production has received a great deal of praise. Moreover, Dr. McDaniel has received numerous awards, including recognition from the Charleston Chamber of Commerce and the National Trust for Historic Preservation for his work and leadership in historic preservation. And under his leadership, Drayton Hall has received many accolades for its pioneering work in preservation and in promoting living history. Each year, for example, over 10,000 K through 12 students visit Drayton Hall and get a first-hand view of how history can and should come alive. In 1989, Lovett was privileged to recognize George as our Distinguished Alumnus of the Year in celebration of his stellar work as a teacher, scholar, and visionary around preservation, and again, what he loves to call living history. Dr. McDaniel devotes his professional life to education, historic preservation, and conservation. He is especially passionate about identifying and bringing to life the soul and heart and energy of history. His vision and work grow out of an unwavering commitment to making sure we grasp history in its totality, and that we're constantly seeking to understand what has happened before us, and that we learn the right lessons of the past as we engage the present and the future. George's lecture this evening is a personal example of living history and of the connections across time that have formed and forged him and his character and his values. Each of us in this room grows out of a multi-dimensional, multi-generational story, and George McDaniel urges us to pursue those stories. Please join me in welcoming Dr. George McDaniel back to his alma mater.
Thank you so much, Billy. I really appreciate the wonderful introduction. I'm sure I have some friends and possibly some family members here in the audience who are wondering who that was being introduced. Sometimes I wonder that myself, but I really do appreciate that wonderful introduction. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here, be back at Lovett, and also back in Atlanta. As Billy was saying, I live now I live in Summerville, South Carolina, which is just outside of Charleston, and been there now for over 20 years, and people ask me where I'm from, and I'm always from Atlanta. This is home for me. My family roots are here, and so Atlanta is home, and Lovett played such a role in shaping my life, so I was delighted and honored to get the opportunity to come back here, and I want to thank the Glenn family for sponsoring this lecture series. I must be honest, because when I received this invitation to speak from Hampton Morris and Billy Peoples, it was by telephone, and I don't know whether the connection was bad or what, but anyway, I heard that I was invited to come back to speak about the forging of character and shaping of values. I thought, I could do that. But I said I would do that provided I controlled the Q&A, because I didn't want my Lovett friends raising their hand. Say, remember that night and so and so and so and so. I didn't want my brother-in-law Phil Hildreth recalling certain things or others. But anyway, it's the Civil War and the shaping of value and the forging of characters. And as that became clear, I also made the explanations. I would be glad to speak, because when Lovett calls, duty calls for me pushes me to answer yes. But I'm not going to follow the typical other approaches of other historians, because I'm not a Civil War historian. Like you have wonderful historians lined up, Edward Ayers, Gary Gallagher, Steve Davis, David Blythe, others. They're excellent Civil War historians. So I wanted to take a somewhat different approach, and I'm sure my former students will understand that, because that's also the way I taught. So I'm going to take a different approach and focus more on the Civil War up close and personal, and I'm going to connect that to my experiences in Vietnam. So I've entitled my presentation, Connecting Journeys and Passing on the Story, the Civil War, Vietnam, and the Shaping of Values. And I've said I want to make this up close and personal. And I've drawn from the recollections of my great-grandmother, Mary Ella Gray Hodnett, who was born in 1850 and was a young girl in 1864, 14 years old, so 8th and 9th grade, when Union troops came through their plantation just south of Jonesboro. And she went on a journey by ox cart that led her to new values about war and about common humanity. I came home from Vietnam changed in many ways, but with a deeper understanding and respect for my fellow man. Just as Ella, as she was saying, war is wrong. It's not only the fighting and killing, it's what it does to the souls and characters of those who fight. When I came back from Vietnam, I wasn't opposed to all war, but I do believe you have to be very careful in going to war, because of what it does to so many people, both combatants and non-combatants. You do indeed unleash the dogs of war, and there are always grave, unintended consequences. I'm going to try to explain how her belief resonated with me and connected our journeys through life. So the content of this presentation is going to consist of 3 parts. First, my journey to Vietnam, the journey of my great-grandmother through the Civil War, and last, my recent research journey in which I sought to locate her in time and place and to trace her actual journey by ox cart at age 14 in the late fall 1864 through the devastated landscape around Jonesboro. In this presentation, I also want to emphasize the value of preserving history. Why is preserving history important? Martin Luther King is said to have said, "He who controls my mind controls my body. He who controls my history controls my mind." Thus, preserving history is not something ephemeral or nice to do, but something central to defining who we are as individuals, as a community, and as a nation. So that's one takeaway message, the value of preserving history. I also want to talk about history as inquiry. And to do that, I'm going to borrow from a story by Fayetteville writer Pharoah Sams. How many of you are familiar with Pharoah Sams? Okay, great writer. Also, how many of you read The Passing? Collection of his short stories with paintings by Jim Harrison. In that book, he tells a story of a Methodist church south of Fayetteville near Inman, Georgia, of a young seminarian who's coming, he's going to be graduating soon, he's looking for a job. So he applies for this church and he's asked to give a sermon. So he comes before the congregation, and before beginning his sermon, he's rather nervous, and so invites all the little children to up front in front of the sanctuary so he can give this little sermonette to them. The little children dutifully sit in front of him, and he begins by saying, "Boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a story about a creature that lives in the woods and runs up and down trees." And the little boys and girls just sit there and look at him. And he says, "Oh, come now, boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a story about a creature that lives in the woods, runs up and down trees, and has a bushy tail. What do you think that is?" And they just look at him. He gets all the more nervous and says, "All right, boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a story about this creature that lives in the woods, runs up and down trees, has a bushy tail, and has sharp nuts and has sharp teeth and eats nuts. What do you think that is?" At which point a little 4-year-old raises her hand and said, "I know we're supposed to say Jesus, but it sounds like a squirrel to me." And that's so often the way history is taught. It's taught by the way of what we're supposed to say. We're supposed to think. Accent is on memorization and not on inquiry. The root word from the Greek for history is inquiry, not memorization, not even story. And so that's the way we need to teach history, is to open it up. And to do so, we need to see history unfold from the perspectives of the participants themselves, from their point of view, and not impose on them our knowledge of the outcomes. There's no such thing as a foreseeable future. Well, first, to begin my journey, let me step back after here to Lovett, because it plays such a strong role in my life's journey. I came here in 1959 when it first opened as a high school, and we were at the Cathedral of St. Philip. And I came to this campus when it first opened and was a member of its first graduating class. There were wonderful teachers who inspired me, like Dr. Vernon Kellett or Dr. Carolyn Sauls, who taught me French and inspired me to study my junior year in college at the University of Paris as its she. I also had great friends, and they're still my friends, including this Heisman Trophy candidate right there that you see, Charles Arp. I don't know if he's in the audience tonight or not, but he's See Frank Walsh and Carol Jones. Bob Bryan's here tonight. My other teammates are Bill Crawley, etc. So I had great friends, and they still are good friends. After graduating from Sewanee, I came back and taught European history and French, and had a lot of fun here. I had a wonderful mentor and teacher, Charles Sagas, had wonderful students. And also at that time, Billy, they allowed us to handle students in a way, let's see, oops, wait, that's up. They allowed us to handle students in ways that may not be allowed today. I don't know, but they were a little different then. But and these people are just still very close to me. After I taught at Lovett, a few years later I was drafted, as was said. And how I came to be drafted is a long story, but to cut it short, I've been in the Peace Corps in Togo, West Africa, and the draft board had promised me a deferment, but they double-crossed me and denied it. And so after losing all my appeals, I had to come home from Africa. When I was drafted, I scored exceptionally high on language aptitude tests since I spoke French fluently and was learning African languages. And so I was slated to go to Vietnamese language school and be an interpreter for Army intelligence. But to do so, one had to pass a security clearance. They checked me out. I'm sure I didn't call on any of my Lovett friends, but the results came in, and I was code Z. Of course, I'd been in the Peace Corps, and I found out that disqualified me from Army intelligence. And I'd also demonstrated against the war. So not only could I not work with Army intelligence, I couldn't go to officers candidate school, nor even to non-commissioned officers school. Like so many other soldiers in my training unit, I was assigned to the infantry and then on to Vietnam. Through this process of physical training, of hours of physical and mental stress, and of learning how to kill, I became hardened. I changed from this to this. Upon arrival in Vietnam, I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, of Omaha Beach fame during the Normandy landing in World War II. We operated between Saigon and Cambodia. Here's South Vietnamese. Here's our area of operations right in here, and here's a closer view of that. Here's Saigon, and we operated in this area. This was known as the Parrot's Beak, Iron Triangle, Trapezoid, Song Bay River. That's the area of our operations. I was never in any big battles like Khe Sanh, Hamburger Hill. I was in the Tet Offensive. Most of our work was counter-guerrilla warfare, anti-insurgency, and we would be choppered out, and I'll show that in just a minute. I was with the 1st Infantry Division, 1st of the 18th Regiment, and when I arrived in our base camp, they showed the history of the 1st of the 18th Regiment, and there it was, the Army of the Cumberland, the Atlanta Campaign. So now I was with the Yankee Army that burned my city. So, so you never know. There's no such thing as a foreseeable future, right? So this was my platoon, my platoon, Alpha Company, guys who became great friends with. I still keep up with several of them, and we get together for reunions. We operated out of a base camp, a fire support base. This is Normandy 3. We would be chopped out on operations, inserted into areas where we would go out on patrols, usually company-sized strength, maybe about 75 of us, and then we'd break up into platoon-sized groups, maybe about 25 or 20 in a platoon, and then set up ambushes during the day or set up ambushes at night, essentially playing hide-and-go-seek with the VC who were playing hide-and-go-seek with us. Here I am soon before we went out on one of the operations. Several incidences that I could tell you about, but I'm just going to just tell you two. In terms of shaping values, and my thoughts especially towards war. This is Bill Maltus, who was a friend of mine. He was walking point, and normally I was behind him where this guy is, and you can see this area has been defoliated by Agent Orange, and I didn't like to work in that stuff. because there was a lot of vines and brambles had grown up. It was hard to get through. And Bill was walking point, I was behind him, and I got hung up in what we call wait a minute vines. And normally I would be about that far behind him, but I was further behind him, and he was just going to the tree line when there was a huge explosion. And I was blown like a chip through the air, landed on my back, and came to, and looked up and I saw a tall black cloud of smoke with leaves just gently falling down, almost like fall. And then I realized what happened, grabbed my weapon, and went running up to see what happened to Bill. Now in training, they teach you not to do that because the VC could be there laying an ambush for you and you go running up and they cut you down. But as I was saying earlier, you're friends, and that's what you do. So we run up to help him, and he was in bad shape. His pants were blown away, and bones were sticking out of his legs like broken matchsticks. He was screaming in pain. Medic came up, shot him up with morphine. I had shrapnel in my face, so I was bleeding all over him. Medevaced him out, and I stayed with my unit because that would make us one man short, and I wasn't badly wounded. But I've never seen anybody in that kind of pain before. And the lesson there is of just what war does to people. And I did learn later that he did survive, and he did not lose both legs. After a long recuperation, he was able to walk again. But that was one incident that shaped firsthand my thoughts about war. I survived, and I realized how lucky I was. Bill wasn't. The second incident is an ambush that our platoon blew early one morning. We were platoon strength, about 25 or 20 of us, 21 of us, something like that. We divided in three teams, 7 men each, along a path. And the VC came by in the morning. They passed by the first position. They let them go. Second position let them go. And then the third position blew. We had Claymore mines, open up machine gun fire, small arms fire. And then they went running back down the path. I was in the second position. We opened up on them. Third position, hit them again. We called in artillery strikes, fire support from Cobra gunships, etc. A VC was crawling up in my position through the elephant grass. I could just hear him. So I pulled out a grenade and just tossed it in his direction and didn't hear him move again. After the firefight was over, we had to sweep the area because you don't know whether you got everybody, whether you could be counterattacked. You need to check out the area. So we got in line to sweep the area, and I passed by the VC who was crawling up on my position, and my grenade had landed right on his back, and it blown it up, and it was just a crater, a blackened crater in his back. We kept going, and I followed a blood trail, and a VC had crawled up under some bushes. And we had to stay in line because when you're in thick jungle like that, if somebody gets out in front of you, you can't see them. So if you get in a firefight, you don't know where your friendlies are. So you need to stay in line so you can fire in front of you. And when I went by saw the VC, I had to go by him, and I didn't know whether he had a pistol or a grenade or whatever. So when I had my back to him, then he could shoot me or throw a grenade on me. So I was going to kill him. And so I radioed to our lieutenant. I said, "You're going to hear fire over here. It's me. There's a what we call them, gooks. There's a gook over here, and I'm going to kill him. He's wounded." And Lieutenant Cook said, "No, go on, George, going around him." So I put my gun on him, and then ease back, till I got sufficient cover, shrubbery, between me and him. And then turned my back, and then we swept the area, and then came back to him, and I put my gun right to his head, and he was on his stomach. Another guy was with me, and we gently rolled him over to be sure there wasn't a grenade underneath him, and there wasn't. And his legs were scrambled. So we shot him up with morphine. and then we called him medevac in. One of our guys had gotten wounded, called medevac in, and I picked him up in my arms and carried him to the medevac. And I don't speak Vietnamese. He didn't speak English. But he was no longer a gook. He was a human being. And we were trying to communicate. And I was telling him, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And he was looking at me, pleading, just hoping. You're going to be okay. You're going to be. And we put him on the chopper and sent him out. And the lesson to me was that that's how we kill people. You dehumanize them. You turn them into a gook, a commie, a nigger, a Jew, a redneck pig, whatever you want to call them. That's what we do to people. We create them as an other. And when we do that to other people, then we can do these things. We can go into war. The awful violence that we see today in America's society. Once you do that, you go through that transformation, and you create these victims as others and not as human beings. So I left with a much clearer understanding of war, of that process, and learned that war was no plaything. It's much more than about the causes, the strategies, and the victories. It's also about people, up close and personal. So some of the things that I learned from Vietnam was that war is no classroom game, no video game, not simulation. Dead people don't get back up again. I remember the first dead VC I saw, he didn't look that hurt. And I came across him, I thought, well, time to get back up. We've been simulating in training, and there was no simulation. War causes pain, whether friend or foe, whether Bill Malthus or that VC. Go into war, you do unleash the dogs of war. You also luck, why him, not me. You change the souls and characters of those who fight. We change. And I came to see life as precarious, as an iffy thing, as meaningless. Yet at the same time, strangely enough, it was balanced by the high value of life as being very precious, because that's what we were fighting for after all. Not glory, not patriotism. We were fighting for our friends. And I came to value all the more our common humanity. So I came back in 1970, went on to build a career, married a wonderful lady, have a family. And in 1989, my mother's first cousin, Bob Pendergrass, knowing of my interest in history, gave me some papers from the Hodnett side of the family. That was my mother's father's family. Her father, Ambrose Hodnett, had died in 1913 when Mother was about 5. So growing up, I didn't hear much about him or that side of the family. And I read the papers with interest. And I came across these graphic stories written by Bob Pendergrass's grandmother, my great-grandmother, Mary Ella Gray, shown in this photograph. And from her recollections, also combined with her recollections, were stories by her daughter Ruth. And according to her daughter Ruth, she said that her mother, quote, saw battlefields strewn with carcasses of horses, overturned cannons, supply wagons, a field of tragedy and desolation. It made such an impression on her young mind. Imagine now, she's 8th or 9th grade. She told it over and over. It's not only the fighting and the killing, it's what it does to the souls and characters of those who fight. But who was this Mary Ella Gray Hodnett? Who was she? 100 years separated me from this woman with a kindred spirit. Mother had a picture of her in our living room, and I'd been told that she had not joined the United Daughters of the Confederacy or believed in the lost cause, but there were no explicit stories explaining why she hadn't gone along with the values of the lost cause and the glorification of war. So what were her experiences? For answers and to try to learn more of the story, I turned to my cousin Bob Pendergrass, who had given me copies of the Hodnett papers. And he turned out to be a key resource. because among the things that he gave me was a photograph of this lady, Ella's mother, Sarah Collier Gray, born in 1814, died in 1907, and this picture was taken a year before she died. He also had other pictures of Mary Ella Gray hiding it at age 17 and 25, and then through her passage of middle age, and when she was elderly, and here you see a picture on the right with a grandchild, about the time she wrote those recollections. And here are just some excerpts from Mary Ella's recollections. Quote, "We could hear the big guns while they were fighting around Atlanta in the small arms at Lovejoy. The Yankees that were camped at Class's Mill made a raid on our farm in August of that year. There was a company of Confederates camped at Cut Bank Ford on the Flint River below where we lived. And 3 of them were standing at our gate when the Yankees were seen coming like a blue cloud down the red lane. The Yankees formed a line of battle in the grove and stood guard while others plundered. My mother went to the front porch when they first rode up and asked for protection for her house and family, which the officer readily granted and put a guard at the front door. But that did not stop them from coming in at the back. They filled the dining room and slopped everything all over the table and floor, a perfect mess, so everything edible was gone. In the meanwhile, others were catching chickens and loading their horses with hams and bacon from the smokehouse. One fellow started rummaging in the bedroom, but my mother went to the door, spoke to the guard, and he made him get out without doing any further damage. They took a wagon loaded with wheat and all the mules and old Charlie the buggy horse and went off with chickens flopping and squawking tied to the saddles. And then after the battle, this is after the Battle of Jonesboro. This is further along in her memoirs. She talks about a journey with her sister Martha. My sister Martha, or Mrs. Merritt, lived in Henry County, was alone with her 4 children as her husband was in Alabama making ammunition for the Southern Army. And as the Yankees began to come near, she became afraid and went to her husband in Alabama. Her home in Henry County was in direct line of Sherman's march to the sea. After the battle was over, their place had been swept of everything, and the railroads were out of commission, so there was no way for them to get back home except to come in by ox cart driven by Joe, one of the young slaves. In the course of time, Joe and Sister Martha arrived at my father's house and spent the night there. The next day, my mother let me go on with her on home. The bridges had all been burned, and the only way we could go was by Jonesboro. We had to ford Morning Creek, Middle Creek, and the Flint River. After crossing the river, we began to see signs of the fighting around Jonesboro. Old camp kettles, cannonballs in the road, the trees all broken and scarred with bullet holes, skeletons of dead horses, and other remains of the army. Not a cow, chicken, or sign of life anywhere. Desolation everywhere. In Jonesboro, some of the houses had bullet holes in them. The windows broken and disorder everywhere. But on we plodded towards my sister's home. With the sun nearly down, one of the oxen lay down in the road, and no persuasion could get him up. There was a house we could see ahead, but we didn't know just whose. The lady came down and was Mrs. Long, who my sister knew. She welcomed us into her home. She made us very comfortable and talked all the time about the war and what a calamity had happened. The next day, we reached my sister's home and found that it was still there. Sherman's officers had made it headquarters while on the march to the sea. So in thinking about this journey, here she is now, she's thinking about her age and thinking about who she was before the war broke out. She's innocent of war, certainly at the outset. She was unprepared for the devastation that was to come, and probably had been supportive, like so many others, of going to war, thinking that it would be a quick victory and having confidence in the wisdom of her elders. But it was these direct experiences of war, the violation of her home, her observations of a landscape once familiar and pastoral, but now with, quote, desolation everywhere, that shaped her values. Having grown up with this picture in our living room and now realizing that we had similar values, I wanted to learn more about Ella. She was my only great-grandparent who had written down her recollections of the war. And my 4 great-grandfathers in Georgia were too young to serve in the Confederate Army. So sensing a kindred spirit, I wanted to retrace her journey and see what might survive, what might have been preserved as physical witnesses to that time. Thus began the third part of my lecture, the journey to retrace Ella's journey by ox cart in late fall 1864. To turn for help, and here we are. This is the area of exploration. Now, mind you, I had grown up in Buckhead, and anything south of Atlanta, Jonesboro, Fayetteville, just wasn't on my radar screen. I did not know that part of the country. And because my grandparents and relatives weren't there anymore, or at least ones that I knew of, I hadn't visited there as a child. So this was terra incognito for me. But off I went. And it's true in so many cases, when you're trying to learn something, you turn to those people who do know, and that's local historians. So I went with Hampton Morris. He joined me on a wonderful day, and we went down to do field research in Fayette County. And I'd called John Lynch, who's here tonight, who works with the Fayette County Historical Society, and who opened up a treasure trove of records for me, and this lecture would not be possible without his help. Here John is with a land lot map of Fayette County, and there's Hampton in the background. And one of the things that John made available for this research was a map used by General Joseph Wheeler of the Confederate Army. And it showed not only, of course, Fayetteville and Jonesboro up there, but it also showed the location of the Gray Plantation here. It showed Glass's Mill and Cut Bank Ford. If you remember in Ella's recollection, she had cited those places. So he knew in general where at least that Gray plantation was, but was it Ambrose Gray's plantation? And this again is where John Lynch was so important, because he did the research with the land lots and deeds and found that Ambrose Williams, Ella's father, had owned these 4 parcels of land, 234, 235, 236, and 246. So this is where Ella and her mother Sarah had lived with Ambrose Gray. They also took me to Glass's Mill where the Union troops had been encamped. They took me to Cut Bank Ford on the Flint River where the Confederates had been. They also showed me the context in which Ella grew up. Here's a Gray plantation, and just right here is the plantation of Philip Fitzgerald, who was the great-grandfather of Margaret Mitchell. And that place served as the inspiration for Gone with the Wind. And John and his friends took Hampton and me to the site of, quote, Tara, to the Fitzgerald plantation. It was located where this grove of trees is now. Now located there is Misty Park at Tara Plantation subdivision. And they took me to the land where the Grays lived. And here I am standing on the road looking up this lane east towards the Flint River. The antebellum home was on the other side of the road, but this is a wonderful home there located there now. It's beautiful rolling countryside, beautiful farmland, and so much of that still has its rural character. Now, Sarah Collier Gray was not one to be tampered with. So when she learned that the federal government was allowing Southerners to lay claims, if you will, for goods taken by the federal army, she submitted a claim. And as I've learned that many of those claims were not recognized, but Sarah, you look at her, she's the kind of lady who didn't take no for an answer. And so she submitted her claim, and she did receive $1,556.45 for 5 mules, 2,000 pounds of bacon, 25 pounds of lard, 600 pounds of flour, 6 pounds of meat, 100 pounds of honey, 171 pounds of butter, or 17 pounds of butter, 700 pounds of salt, and 6 sides of leather. So you can see the abundance of that plantation as well, just by that inventory. Lynch also introduced me to John Minter, who was one of Ella's, descendant of Ella's sister, former editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and according to him, the proceeds from that claim to the federal government was received by Sarah Gray and distributed among her children. And years ago, my mother gave me a pocket watch that had belonged to her father. And according to Jim Minter, the children of Sarah Gray had used that money to buy pocket watches. And so it could be that this pocket watch that I now have from my grandfather was acquired by way of the proceeds from that raid of 1864. So I now have a tangible connection to Ella's Civil War experience, a possible connection. We need to research the history of this watch, but it's a possible connection. Lynch also took us to the road down which that blue cloud of Union troops had come and which Ella had departed on her way to Jonesboro. We went by Morning Creek, middle of Flint River, went to through Jonesboro and saw the antebellum homes that Ella probably would have seen. And then Hampton and I proceeded on into Henry County. And there the trail ran cold because we had been told that the Merritt Plantation was located near a mill site, but weren't sure where. So I didn't have any, we looked but couldn't find exactly what we needed, so the trail ran cold. So once again, we needed help. So I turned to Henry County historian Gene Morris, who's here tonight. And he stepped forward, and he knows the history like John Lynch. He knows the history of Henry County like the back of his hand. And Gene Morris took me to the site of the Long Plantation where Ella was welcomed for the night when the ox died. He also took me on to the site of the Merritt Plantation, which is now a gated community, and which, instead of crops now, grows McMansions. And Morris also connected me with another possible link. And this is a possible connection across a century of time. Because Morris showed me that the great-grandfather of Martin Luther King Jr. was Jim Lindsay, who was enslaved at the Long Plantation. Jim Lindsay could have been there to welcome my great-grandmother that night. Jim Lindsay was the father of Delia Lindsay, mother of Martin Luther King Sr. And Delia Lindsay, when Martin Luther King Sr. in his autobiography describes this moment, his mother's dying and he is really outraged by the lack of medical treatment for his mother, by the ills of segregation and the results of white prejudice. And he declares to his mother, "I hate white people." And quickly his mother responds, "Don't hate. Nothing comes of hatred but more hatred." So might those values that Delia passed on to her son have come from Jim Lindsay of the Long Plantation. And later, Martin Luther King has a similar experience, and Martin Luther King Sr. tells him the same thing. Don't hate, Nothing comes of hatred but more hatred. A century later, in December 1967, a friend of mine who taught here at Lovett, Lorraine White, invites me for dinner with Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta. And another teacher from Lovett is there. It's a small, just intimate dinner. And Martin Luther King was very, very tired. He was getting hammered on his left because the Black Power movement was accusing him of being too moderate and Uncle Tom. And on his right, he was opposed to the war in Vietnam, and he had brought the civil rights movement up into the North. So he was very tired. We're not supposed to talk about politics. But what I appreciated so much about that night was how personable Dr. King was. I graduated from Lovett. After our graduation, not too long after then, his son applies to Lovett and is rejected because of his race. So Dr. King could have rejected me as an emblem of school, of segregation, and so forth. I taught there and was a graduate of that school. But there was no bitterness, no mention of that whatsoever. He recognized me as an individual and our common humanity. And I was very concerned about which path to take. And I learned later from Lorraine White that she said that he really liked me, wanted to talk to me further. I went into the Peace Corps, did not get back in touch with him. And then I went to the Peace Corps in January of 1968. And of course, in April, he was assassinated. But I'll never forget how personal he was and recognized me as an individual for who I was. So thanks to these local historians, Ella's Civil War journey that did so much to shape her values has now been retraced. We've seen that little remains of the Civil War, and this in turn shows how little historic preservation has been valued as Atlanta has boomed and sprawled out in recent decades. Ella's journey comes to a close, but the first research journey that Hampton and I took was continued and now gives an opportunity for some further explanations. And I'm going to talk a moment about Miller's Mill, because another historian, Henry County historian Joe Moore, had told us to visit Miller's Mill in search of the Merritt Plantation. He suggested we go there. So we went to the Big Cotton Indian Creek, where the Miller's Mill was located. And from this bridge, Hampton and I looked down and saw in the distance that mill. We eased our way down there, and what did we see but a rare and complete survival of a mill complex with its mill pond, mill buildings, and a water-powered cotton gin. A remarkable survivor of a bygone era. I located a copy of the Historic Sites Survey that had been done by the Georgia State Department Georgia Historic Preservation Office, and it showed that mill had been in operation from the 1830s to about 2000. I contacted the owner of the store, Herman Miller, who told me about his cousin, Ray Miller. I contacted Ray, whose grandfather used to own and operate the mill. Like John Lynch and Gene Morris, Ray was a fount of knowledge, so I organized a field visit with Billy Peoples and wonderful students from Lovett so that they could experience firsthand the learning of history. And so we had this trip. There you can see the students learning directly from Ray about the operations of that mill, putting people in place together. And they learn about the passing on of the story using oral history, connecting people, place, and artifacts. And here you see cotton gins with cotton still in there that dates to 1959 when the cotton gins were last operated. And here you see Richard Laub and Laura Drummond with Ray Miller. They are professors of historic preservation at Georgia State University's historic preservation program. I invited them to join us, and they were enthralled by this remarkable survivor and planned to use the site in their class next fall to teach their students how to document a place and people. They may also work with Lovett students so that Lovett students can learn how to do so, combining oral history, videography, measured drawings, art, and so forth in order to capture the history, the total history of a place as it changed over time. And with us tonight is Ray Miller. Ray also brought to that field trip a wealth of exercises, a wealth of materials, photographs and visual evidence that could enrich the student study, personalize it, and teach students how to use a variety of resources in their research of history. The mill site, which was established before the Civil War, and perhaps Ella saw it, I'm not going to stretch it, but anyway, it was antebellum, cannot be physically preserved now. That's out of the question. Money was not there. But the story could be preserved, and the evidence of learning from and about people like Ray Miller could help broaden the students' values and their human understanding. So connecting journeys, passing on the story of our common humanity, past and present. That's what this lecture has been about. What connects the specific journeys of Ella and me? Separated by time and place, she was a civilian, I was a soldier. She saw human destruction, I did it. But both of us came to realize what war does to people, to their, quote, souls and characters. We came to value our common humanity. We came both to value historic preservation as a way of passing on our story. I draw wisdom from the writings of Drew Gilpin Faust in her book, This Republic of Suffering. And she writes, quote, "The power of the voices of those who experienced the war and the opportunity to look at the war through their eyes from the letters and diaries they left really changed how I saw the war. The act of listening to them was transformative for me." So researching history, preserving history, learning about the lives of real people in honest ways can be a transformative experience. It builds empathy with people of the past. It connects us to them, nurtures our understanding and appreciation of our common humanity. By seeing history as inquiry, by opening it up, we come to learn that we are never fully prepared for war and what it does to the souls and characters of both civilians and those who fight. We also learn that life is a journey. We're always learning and must use our values to guide us. We also learn that there's no such thing as a foreseeable future, which the Civil War has writ large. So we have to use our values to guide us, values sometimes learned, ironically enough, from war. And for Ella and me, war made us value all the more the common humanity of us all. War led us to accent in our lives what brings us together instead of what separates us. And for me, that has made all the difference in the world. Fortunately, Ella's story was preserved by written records and by photographs because the places she knew are gone. There's no tangible, quote, history left on the landscape that would serve as markers to tell people that history happened here. But if we reach out, listen to our family members, and work with local historians like John Lynch, Ray Miller, or Gene Morris, maybe we can find stories of our heritage that warrant preservation. Instead of antebellum homes or preserved battlefields, as I'd hoped for, our journey may lead us to historic mill, river crossings, artifacts, photographs, documents that connect us to history and to one another. And if we remember, as historian Drew Faust has told us, the experience itself of researching and preserving history, of getting to know people of the past and of the present on their terms is, quote, transformative. We may come to value all the more the fact that the journeys of each of us connects us to all. And we may come to understand that by valuing our common humanity more than our separateness, we come to follow Lovett's motto, Omnia Dei Gloriam. Thank you. Thank you. Good.
Please say a couple things when you come to
You
the
good?
Q&A.
You want me to do that now? Okay.
Coach George has said he'd be happy to take a few questions, so we'll do that for 15 or 20 minutes, and then he's going to hang around a while after that. The questions for Dr. McDaniel.
On the topic of the lecture, and by the way, while I'm here, I want to recognize all the historians who've been so wonderful in helping me. Ray, would you please stand, Ray, Jean, Hampton Morris, where's John Lynch? And Hampton Morris, great help for me, and also Sarah Jane Overstreet is somewhere here. Sarah Jane Overstreet's in the audience somewhere, and she was a great help for me with family research as well. It was just, yeah.
Did you think in your meditations on the two wars that their peculiar natures, civil wars,
Yeah.
and purely militarily defined, do you think that that had a more wrenching effect upon your life journey and your study of these two wars?
That's an interesting question. The wars. No, that's fine. That's a hard question to answer. The Vietnam War was a civil war, and it's also geopolitical as well. And what we were up against was mainly anti-guerrilla warfare. It was nothing like the battles that we know in the American Civil War. So in that sense, it's different. I think where we may have in common is those things that the light combat I was in, and I was in nothing like the soldiers in the Civil War or other soldiers in Vietnam, but just the combat I did see, I think there's a sense of commonality there. I mean, when you do take someone's life and someone's wounded and so forth, there's you on the one hand, as I would say, you get hardened to it, which is awful, but that's the way it is. And then on the other hand, it touches you afterwards in ways that stay with you. And I think in looking at the American Civil War, we may not have done enough in studying the after effects of the Civil War on those people who survived. When I got back from Vietnam, I was discharged right away. I had less than 150 days to go, and I was out on the pavement. I didn't have, quote, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Nobody talked about it. There was no help whatsoever. And we've seen that now, with soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think that the wars there's a commonality, I guess, of any war, and what we haven't done enough, I don't think, is in terms of the American Civil War, is look at the effects, longer-term effects on the soldiers coming back, because just as I was affected in ways that I didn't know I was, I'm sure that there were many Civil War soldiers who were affected coming back, and that lived with the trauma, much more trauma than I even thought about going through, and had to live through. I was in a Civil War in part, but very different from the American Civil War.
What are your thoughts today when you look at something like drone warfare? It's not up close and
I know.
personal.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. I have mixed feelings about it because on the one, it's very clean. You don't have, you do it. It's very removed and so forth. On the other hand, what Ray said, it is well that war is so. What is it? It's well that war is so terrible. Otherwise, we'd grow too fond of it. And the concern with drone warfare, it becomes too much like a video game. So you're doing it, and you're operating in Florida or wherever you are, and you're just controlling this drone, and then you fire, and these people are blown to bits, including non-combatants, and you have no experience of that whatsoever. And so, the danger is one becoming too fond of it, because you don't see the effects on real people. And once it's not a given by any means, but at least for me, but once I saw those effects, and I became much more cautious about going to war as a result of that. So I'd be very cautious about that drone warfare could become so too popular because it's so easy, it's so mechanical, you're so removed from it. And you've always got to remember that lesson. These are real people. They may be your enemy or whatever, but they hurt too. They scream. They don't want to die. They're human beings. Yeah.
How did you feel when you came back from Vietnam, with the reception that most soldiers got when they came back? People looking at the political side, and you had formed your values of the human side of it.
Yeah. That's a good question. What did I think when I came back? Well, I never experienced any, people spitting on me, or you hear a lot about these stories. I never encountered any of that, and I never knew any friends who did. In fact, I came back all the more opposed to the war because I saw it as a lesson, and it was futile. We lost. We went through the Vietnamization and worked with South Vietnamese soldiers, and they didn't believe in what they were fighting for. We'd be out on ambush and outside of the protecting villages, and they'd get up at 12 midnight and go back in the village and give away our position at night. I just didn't. I didn't like to. They weren't professional soldiers, and we were good soldiers. There's a craft to anything. We were darn good soldiers. So I wanted us to pull out much more quickly than we did, and I joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War, though I wasn't become very active because the war becomes so personal. I joined it here in Atlanta, and I went to several meetings. There were a bunch of guys who told war stories, and I didn't want to be around them because those of you who've been in the field, you know quickly you can spot people who tell lies. And that's one thing I couldn't stand. So I just didn't get that much involved with it. But barstool commandos, that sort of thing. So anyway, so I wish we'd gotten out of Vietnam a lot quicker. I did not see any way of winning the war from our operations. And the South Vietnamese soldiers I didn't find them very good soldiers. And then the South Vietnamese peasants just wanted to be left alone. So there was no traction for us. The carnage just continued. For what reason? So I did not have anyone, hostile to me when I came back. But though other soldiers have, I've heard accounts of that. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. This is Bob Pendergrass's older brother. God, it's wonderful.
God was such a wonderful deliverer. And I was glad you gave some credit to Martin Luther King, because I had just read some material that I had not known about before, which was the fact that the civil rights movement, many of them greatly resented his opposition to the Vietnam War, thinking that it distracted from the focal point of civil rights.
That's right.
And his answer to that was to draw a connection between the resources drained off from the human population by the material, financial, and personnel expended upon war that could have been used
At home.
on improving life at home.
Right.
That he was opposed to injustice, whether it was in Montgomery, Alabama, or whether it was in Vietnam.
Right.
That in a nation which year after year expended more on military battles than it did on uplift material, was doomed to suffer as a result. And with one other recollection, but my grandmother, our common grandmother, was on her deathbed in 1934. She called all of her grandchildren to the side with a very simple message. children, I have lived a long life. Everyone cannot live a long life, but everyone can live a good life. And I was quite touched by that.
And she did. And she did. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you, John, for being here tonight. Thank you.